The galaxy is built for specialists. Humanity was built to survive them. The premier empires mistook our comfort for fragility, forgetting that a specialist survives only where it belongs. But a journalist survives anywhere. This is human ascendancy. Today, an alien instructor tries to break a human persistence. Hunter and learns a cold, hard lesson.
The breaking point of a recruit's spirit wasn't marked by a scream or a broken bone. It was marked by the silence that followed when pride finally left their eyes. Chief Combat Instructor Vex Alvor had broken exactly 73 trainees in his 12 cycles at the Calreth Military Academy, and he wore that number like a pristine Medal of Honor. He did not break them physically. The Academy's executive board had incredibly strict, litigious policies against permanent anatomical sabotage. No, Vex Alvor specialized in a far more surgical kind of destruction. He specialized in breaking egos, crushing species-wide arrogance, and sending overconfident galactic recruits back to their homeworlds with a newfound appreciation for absolute humility. His reputation preceded him through the barracks like a kinetic shockwave. Trainees whispered his name in the dark with the kind of trembling reverence usually reserved for unpredictable planetary disasters. The heavy, razor-edged scales running down his spine were dark green, capable of slicing through reinforced subarmor during active demonstrations. Furthermore, his homeworld of Drower Prime boasted a natural gravity at 3.2 times the galactic standard. This meant Vex Alvor possessed a dense, compact skeletal structure that allowed him to crush 90% of the galaxy's known species in hand-to-hand combat without ever breaking a sweat. So, when Commander Kellis summoned him to the command tier to discuss the incoming human trainee, Vex Alvor's immediate response was a loud, derisive snort that physically rattled the data tablets on the commander's desk. "A human?" Vex Alvor's voice rumbled out like jagged gravel turning inside a metal barrel. "From Earth? That backwater, low-density gravity well with a 1.0 baseline standard." "You cannot be serious, Commander." Kellis, a four-armed Zenthian with far more administrative patience than Vex Alvor deserved, merely rubbed her temples and pulled up the holographic personnel file. "The Galactic Council approved their formal admission to the Academy 6 cycles ago, Instructor. This human, Owen Bridger, comes with exceptionally high recommendations from their planetary defense forces. A special operations background. Multiple combat commendations." "Commendations," Vex Alvor repeated, loading the word with enough dripping sarcasm to fill a cargo freighter. "For what? Successfully walking upright in their pathetic excuse for an environment? Commander, their entire planet possesses the gravitational pull of a feather floating in a summer breeze. These humans are fragile, weak-boned novelties who probably require mechanized assistance just to open their own pressurized doors." "Nevertheless," Keyless continued, her tone sharpening with command authority, "he arrives tomorrow morning at 0800 standard. You will assess his performance exactly like any other trainee in your cohort. A fair, unbiased evaluation, Instructor." Vex Alvor's thick tail twitched sharply against the floor, a biological tell that everyone in the department recognized as trouble brewing. "Oh, I will assess him, Commander. Fairly. By our standards, not his." The next morning, Vex Alvor stood dead in the center of Training Bay 7, his massive arms tightly crossed over his scaled chest. 12 other elite trainees, representing 8 distinct premier worlds, stood at absolute attention in a rigid semicircle formation. Every single one of them had heard the rumors. A human was joining their cohort. The betting pools in the lower barracks
had already reached massive credit volumes. The over-under for how long Owen Bridger would survive Vex Alvor's introductory regimen stood at 4 standard days. Vex Alvor himself had personally placed 50 credits on 2. The localized pressure doors hissed open precisely at 800. In walked the human. Vexalvor's first visceral thought was how laughably underwhelming the specimen appeared. Owen Bridger stood maybe 1.8 meters tall, which was almost comical by drawn military standards. His frame was lean, almost wiry, lacking any of the massive boulder-like muscle density Vexalvor associated with actual interstellar warriors. The human had dark hair cropped close to his skull, sharp features, and eyes that struck the instructor as unnervingly, almost deceptively calm. He wore the standard gray academy training uniform, which looked like dress-up clothes on his lean frame. Trainee Owen Bridger reporting as ordered. Instructor, the human said. His voice was steady, even and entirely unremarkably average. Vexalvor began to circle him slowly, making a grand theatrical show of his physical inspection. He let his heavy claws click against the metal floor plates, looming over the smaller biped. So, you are the Earthling, Vexalvor rumbled, his scales bristling slightly. Tell me, Bridger, how does it feel to be so very far away from your comfortable low-gravity paradise? Feels fine, instructor, Owen replied, his gaze fixed straight ahead, utterly devoid of inflection. Fine, Vexalvor mocked, turning to face the rest of the cohort. Of course it does. Do you know what your species' fundamental problem is, human? Your entire lineage evolved in what we consider a gentle environmental suggestion of gravity, 1.0 standard. Do you know what that means mathematically? It means your bones are hollow, like the skybirds of the outer rim. It means your muscles have never had to work for a single ounce of leverage. It means you are essentially constructed out of tissue paper and wishful thinking. A few of the senior alien trainees snickered audibly in the formation. Owen's facial expression did not shift by a single millimeter. I have trained legendary warriors from dozens of heavy worlds, Vexalvor continued, warming up to his speech. Beings who grew up under real bone-crushing atmospheric pressure, beings whose very physiology was forged in crucible environments that would literally liquefy your internal organs. And you think you belong here? In this historic academy, training alongside actual soldiers? I am not here to think about whether I belong, instructor, Owen said quietly, his eyes shifting slightly to meet the alien's gaze. I am here to train. Oh, how noble! Vexalvor's voice dripped with raw contempt. Well then, let us see exactly what Earth's finest has to offer. Because I promise you this, trainee Bridger, by the time I am finished breaking you, you will be begging for the next transport shuttle back to your soft little dirt world where everything is easy, where gravity is just a polite suggestion. Owen met his intense gaze without flinching. Understood, instructor. Something flickered deep inside those human eyes, a cold, ancient light that would have given a wiser instructor pause. But Vexalvor was many things, and wise about the psychology of humans was not among them. ACE 3, Combat Form Alpha. The gravity chamber of Calreth Academy was a masterpiece of heavy industrial engineering. It was a massive circular arena composed of reinforced durasteel flooring, its walls lined with high-output gravitational field generators. It could simulate conditions from a floating 0.5 standard all the way up to a lethal 5.0. Vexalvor herded the trainees into the chamber like livestock, his tail swishing with contained glee. Standard acclimation protocol, he announced through the central console, his voice bouncing off the unyielding metal walls. We start at 1.5 standard gravity and progress upward in linear intervals. Each level will last exactly 5 minutes. You will perform basic combat forms, endurance holds, and agility drills. Any failure to maintain perfect form results in an immediate disqualification. He paused, letting his heavy gaze land squarely on the human. Of course, I fully expect we will see our first casualty rather quickly today. Some species simply lack the structural integrity for real military stress. Owen said absolutely nothing. He simply stepped into his designated coordinates on the grid, adjusting his footing on the smooth durasteel. Vexalvor slammed his palm onto the activation control. The gravitational field hummed to life with a deep, bone-rattling bass. Instantly, the very air inside the chamber became heavy, thick, and pressurized. 1.5 standard gravity was hardly extreme. It was barely half of a Dron's natural homeworld pull. But Vexalvor watched with immense satisfaction as several trainees immediately shifted their weight.
their scales tightening as they compensated for the sudden influx of mass. "Combat Form Alpha!" Vexalvor barked. "Begin!" The cohort moved into the opening sequence. Basic kinetic strikes, defensive postures, and lateral footwork drills. At 1.5, this was elementary warm-up territory. Vexalvor prowled the outer perimeter of the grid like a predator, correcting stances with sharp, painful jabs of his clawed fingers, and shouting criticisms that echoed like gunfire. Then, his eyes locked onto Owen. Vexalvor felt his very first twinge of surprise. The human was moving through the complex martial sequences with a fluid, flawless precision. There was no hesitation, no awkward adjustment period. His footwork remained remarkably clean, his strikes snapped with crisp velocity, and his center of balance was perfectly anchored. If the increased gravity was affecting his internal organs or his muscles, it certainly didn't show on his face, which maintained that same maddeningly calm expression. "Time!" Vexalvor called out, his voice a bit more rushed than necessary. 2.0 standard! Adjust positions!" The field generators whined as they ramped up the power. Now the true test began. 2 times standard gravity was the baseline where the Academy typically separated the competent recruits from the exceptional. Several trainees visibly sagged under the increased weight, their breathing turning into heavy, deliberate gasps. "Combat! Form Beta! Faster this time!" Vexalvor ordered. Groans of immense physical effort filled the chamber. Fane, a massive, reptilian recruit whose species hailed from a 1.3 gravity world, was already breathing hard, his 3-fingered hands shaking violently as he tried to maintain a proper guard position. A Zenthian trainee stumbled during a lateral pivot, her knee slamming into the durasteel with a painful gasp. But Owen Bridger flowed through the sequence like water, moving faster, striking harder, exactly as Vexalvor had demanded. His punches snapped like whips, his kicks extended and chambered without the slightest hint of a tremor. If anything, he looked far more comfortable now than he had at 1.5. Vexalvor's jaw clenched so hard his scales bristled. "Apparently 2.0 is not a sufficient challenge for this intake," he announced, his voice carrying a dangerous, vindictive edge. "Let us see how you handle an environment with actual mass behind it. 2.5 standard gravity, immediately." "Instructor," one of the senior alien trainees wheezed, her chest heaving under the weight. "Protocol requires incremental increases of 0.5 intervals, not full-point progressions." "I am well aware of the Academy protocols, trainee," Vexalvor snapped, his tail lashing. "I wrote half of them. 2.5 now." The field generators screamed as they pushed into the orange zone of the power core. 2.5 times standard gravity was serious business. This was the kind of atmospheric and physical pressure that could cause severe internal hemorrhaging and structural tearing in unprepared species. It was also 0.3 higher than a drain's natural home gravity, meaning even Vexalvor felt the weight as a pleasant, bracing resistance against his own movements. The effect on the trainees was immediate and utterly devastating. 3 of them dropped to their knees outright, their leg muscles simply giving out under the crushing, invisible weight. Fane managed to stay upright, but he stood completely frozen in place, every single muscle in his massive body locked in a desperate, trembling effort just to remain standing. The remaining recruits wavered, fighting for each breath, their previous combat forms entirely abandoned in favor of basic survival. And Owen Bridger, the human, executed a flawless, textbook spinning back kick that would have taken an opponent's head clean off their shoulders. He returned to his guard stance, his breathing slightly elevated, but his eyes completely locked onto the instructor. Again, Owen said calmly, resetting his hands. "Should I continue the sequence, instructor?" Vex Alvor stared. He actually stared, his mouth hanging slightly open in an expression of pure, unadulterated shock that had not crossed his face in over a decade. The human wasn't struggling. He wasn't straining. He was standing perfectly upright in 2.5 standard gravity, a level that was currently flattening trainees from 9 premier worlds, and he was casually asking if he should keep going. "You," Vex Alvor's voice came out strangled, his pride taking a direct hit. "You are not even breathing hard." "Should I be, instructor?" Owen asked. There was something in his tone now. It wasn't quite overt mockery, but it was definitively not respect either. It was the tone of someone holding back a smile because the obstacle in front of them was entirely underwhelming. "Combat Form Delta!" Vex Alvor snarled, his rage boiling over. "Full sequence! Maximum speed!" Owen nodded once and exploded into motion. It was beautiful in the terrifying way that predatory efficiency is always beautiful. The human's body moved with absolute, mathematically perfect control. Every kinetic technique was executed with textbook precision, but there was real, devastating power behind it now. His footwork was flawless, his weight transitions smooth as silk, despite the crushing gravitational force trying to slam his spine into the floor. He executed a jumping knee strike that should have been physically impossible at this gravity level, followed by a spinning elbow that cut through the pressurized air with an audible, violent force. Behind him, a trainee vomited inside her helmet and collapsed unconscious onto the metal. Vex Alvor barely even noticed. His entire reality was locked onto the human, watching this impossible biped with a mixture of confusion and a growing, blinding anger. Owen finished the final strike of the sequence, returned to a perfect attention stance, and waited. His chest was rising and falling, sure, but barely. Like a man who had just jogged up a flight of stairs, not performed advanced combat forms under gravity that should have been liquefying his joints. "How?" Vex Alvor demanded, stepping onto the grid, his voice cracking slightly. "How are you doing this? Your planet has a 1.0 standard gravity. You should be crippled right now. You should be broken on the floor with the rest of them." Owen glanced calmly at the other trainees, most of whom were now sitting or lying flat on their backs, gasping for air like fish out of water. Then, he looked straight into Vex Alvor's eyes. "Permission to speak freely, instructor." "Granted," Vex Alvor growled, stepping closer. 2.5 gravity is just a Tuesday, sir." Those 4 words hit Vex Alvor like a direct plasma bolt to the chest. In 12 cycles of instructing at the most prestigious military academy in 7 sectors, no recruit had ever spoken to him with such casual systemic dismissal. The sheer audacity of it, the absolute nerve of this skinny little human from a pathetic low-gravity paradise, standing there in conditions that had reduced hardened galactic warriors to whimpering wrecks and calling it a Tuesday. Vex Alvor's pride took the hit personally. "Medical team," he barked into his internal comm unit, never taking his eyes off Owen. "Extract the failures immediately. Everyone else, you are dismissed from the bay. Not you, Bridger. You stay exactly where you are." The other trainees could not leave fast enough. They limped, crawled, and staggered out of the chamber, while automated medical drones dragged the unconscious recruits toward the bay doors. Within 2 minutes, the massive circular chamber was entirely empty, save for Vex Alvor and the human. The silence stretched between them like a physical, tense wire. "You think you are clever," Vex Alvor said softly, his voice dropping into a menacing whisper that was far more dangerous than his usual bark. "You think you have impressed me with your little display, but all you have done, trainee Bridger, is prove that you require a proper, definitive lesson in humility. One that I will be absolutely delighted to provide." I am here to learn, instructor, Owen replied, his posture completely relaxed. Oh, you will learn. Vex Alvor's smile was pure malice. Gravity alone is clearly insufficient to break your spirit. So, let us add some real-world complications, shall we? Computer. Load Combat Simulation Protocol 7. Hostile entities active. Lethal force authorized. Environmental hazards online. Warning! The computer's synthetic voice announced through the overhead speakers. Protocol 7 is rated for experienced special operations personnel only. Trainee fitness level has not been verified for this scenario. Override! Vex Alvor snapped, his scales bristling. Authorization! Vex Alvor 99 Alpha. Override accepted. Initializing combat simulation. Maintain 2.5 gravity field. The training bay instantly transformed. High-density holographic projectors flickered to life, rendering a smoking, devastated urban war zone around them. Ruined concrete structures, burning vehicle chassis, and deep craters providing tactical cover. And then, the enemies materialized. 12 hostile combat drones, heavily armored and armed with high-output stun weaponry that would hurt like absolute hell even if it didn't kill. Good luck, human, Vex Alvor sneered, stepping back onto the observation track. Try not to die within the first minute. The drones opened fire immediately, a barrage of red stun bolts slicing through the holographic smoke. Owen moved, and Vex Alvor, despite his anger, despite his wounded ego, despite everything, could not help but watch in stunned, paralyzed fascination. The human didn't run for cover. He didn't panic or hesitate. He simply exploded into lateral motion with a raw velocity that should not have been mathematically possible under a 2.5 gravitational load. He executed a low slide beneath the first salvo of fire, came up instantly behind a holographic concrete barrier, assessed the entire tactical field in maybe half a second, and then vaulted over the barrier in a move that completely defied basic physics. At 2.5 standard gravity, that jump should have cleared knee height at best. Instead, Owen launched his body into a full combat leap, twisting midair to avoid 3 incoming tracking bolts, and came down directly on top of the nearest drone with both boots. The raw kinetic impact crushed the machine's central housing into sparking scrap metal. Impossible, Vex Alvor muttered to himself. Owen was already moving again. He grabbed a massive piece of holographic debris, which the simulation's high-end haptic feedback rendered solid enough to manipulate, and hurled it with devastating, lethal accuracy. The massive chunk of concrete took out 2 flanking drones in a single throw, the projectile moving with enough velocity to completely shatter their armored casings. Computer, Vex Alvor growled into the console, his anger turning into an obsession. Increase hostiles. Add 6 more units. Increase gravity field to 3.0 standard immediately. Act 6. The survival of the generalist. Warning. Such parameters exceed recommended training limits. Do it, Vex Alvor ordered. The gravity field surged violently to 3 times standard. The sudden, immense pressure made Vex Alvor's own movements outside the grid feel sluggish, heavy, and deliberate. The holographic environment erupted into absolute chaos. 6 additional military-grade drones materialized, opening fire from elevated positions. Explosive charges detonated randomly across the sand. Structural concrete walls began to collapse to block escape routes, and shifting energy barriers flickered into existence, forcing constant, split-second tactical reassessments. Owen absorbed the entire tactical nightmare without ever breaking his stride. In fact, if anything, he seemed to actively thrive on the chaos. The human moved through the smoking wreckage like it was his natural evolutionary element, using the increased gravity to his advantage in ways Vex Alvor had never witnessed in 12 cycles of military instruction. When Owen dropped from elevated platforms, he used the gravity-multiplied mass to come down with enough force to literally crater the floor. When he struck the combat drones with his bare fists, his strikes carried the weight of 3 times his normal mass, obliterating their metal frames with single, crushing blows. It was no longer an effective combat demonstration. It was terrifying. Owen grabbed a drone by its central processor housing, lifted the struggling, thrusting machine completely over his head despite the 3 times gravity, and used it as a manual battering ram against 2 others. Then, he hurled the flaming wreckage at a 4th unit with such velocity that both machines exploded in a violent shower of sparks and shrapnel. "How are you doing this?" Vexalvor demanded, his voice cracking as he stepped toward the edge of the grid. "Your species, your planet, your entire evolutionary history. None of it explains this. You should be dead. You should be a smear on my floor plates. You should be begging for mercy." Owen destroyed the final drone with a jumping roundhouse kick that would have made physics professors weep, then turned his body to face Vexalvor. He was breathing harder now, his chest heaving, definitely feeling the extreme physical strain of the 3.0 field. But he was still standing, still functional, still absolutely, maddeningly capable. "Instructor," Owen said, his voice steady despite the weight trying to collapse his lungs. "Have you ever actually studied Earth's environmental history?" "I do not require a study of your backwater planet to recognize physical benchmarks," Vexalvor barked. "Earth has a 1.0 standard gravity now, Instructor," Owen interrupted, his tone cold. "But that isn't what my ancestors survived to get here. We didn't grow up in a stable, pressurized cage. My ancestors survived multiple ice ages. We survived supervolcano eruptions that blocked out the sun for a decade. We survived apex predators that made your combat drones look like children's toys. We survived atmospheric plagues that killed millions, starvation, droughts, floods, and thousands of years of our own continuous wars. We aren't strong because our gravity baseline is high, Instructor. We are strong because everything else on our planet spent millions of cycles trying to murder us, and we simply refuse to die." Vexalvor stared at him, his scales bristling violently, his tail lashing in extreme agitation. "We did not evolve in comfort," Owen continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward under that crushing 3 times gravity. "We evolved in hell, and hell makes you strong in ways that a high gravity index alone never could. Your planet made you a specialist for one specific environment, Instructor. My planet made me a generalist for any environment." Something inside Vexalvor's mind permanently snapped. His pride, his ego, his pristine reputation as the ultimate breaker of spirits, all of it coalesced into a pure, incandescent rage. "You want hell, human?" Vexalvor's voice dropped to a deadly, venomous whisper. "I will show you the absolute baseline of hell." His heavy claws extended as he reached for the main gravity controls, bypassing the automated security panels. "Computer, maximum setting, 4.2 standard gravity. Override all safety protocols. Authorization code, Vexalvor Omega Prime. Warning, catastrophic physical damage may occur to organic entities. Do you wish to proceed?" "Execute," Vexalvor roared. The universe became unimaginably heavy. 4.2 times standard gravity was never meant for living tissue. It was a theoretical engineering metric, the kind of setting used in deep space labs for stress testing, starship hull plating, and high-density industrial alloys, not flesh and blood. The gravitational field generators inside the walls screamed in high-pitched protest, their cooling arrays immediately fusing as alarms began to shriek throughout the entire facility. Vexalvor felt the weight instantly. His massive drawn knees buckled slightly, his breath coming in short, labored gasps as his own dense body mass suddenly multiplied beyond anything his physiology had ever prepared for. The pressure was immense, a crushing, suffocating weight that made every movement feel like trying to swim through liquid lead. His prized scales now felt like they weighed as much as a heavy battlecruiser's armor plating. But he was drawn. He would endure. He had to endure, because across the chamber, the human had dropped to one knee. Owen's face went completely pale, his chest pressing down toward the sand as the blood struggled to fight its way up to his brain against the extreme pressure. For one glorious, triumphant moment, Vexalvor thought he had finally won. He thought the human would finally collapse, break, and beg for the field to be deactivated. Then, Owen's hands flattened against the durasteel floor. His forearm muscles tensed, the veins in his neck bulging as his jaw locked. And slowly, impossibly, he began to push his body back up. "No," Vexalvor gasped, his own lungs burning. "No, you cannot." "Computer," Owen's voice was strained, thick with blood but eerily clear over the blaring emergency alarms. "Acknowledge trainee request. Increase combat simulation to level 10. Authorization code, Earth Defense Force Bridger Delta 773. Warning! The computer's automated red lights flashed. Trainee authorization code accepted. Level 10 combat protocol is designated for extreme survival scenarios only. Fatality risk is evaluated at 93%. Do you wish to proceed?" "Accepted," Owen whispered. There was something in his voice now, a cold, hollow finality that had not been there before. Not anger, not pride. Something much older. "Load all hostiles. No restrictions." The training bay erupted into absolute, unmitigated madness. 20 military-grade combat drones materialized instantly through the holographic arrays, their weapon systems automatically overriding the Academy safety blocks. Their lasers were no longer set to stun. These were tactical combat units that immediately spread out across the war zone, establishing elevated firing positions and coordinating their assault vectors like a real frontline military division. And, right in the center of the storm, under a 4.2 gravity field that should have been fracturing his ribs, Owen Bridger went to war. It was nothing like his previous controlled, measured combat demonstrations. Before, Owen had been practicing technique and precision. Now, he was a primal force of nature. He moved like gravity was nothing more than a minor environmental inconvenience he had chosen to ignore. A drone fired a lethal plasma bolt at point-blank range. Owen somehow twisted his torso sideways, the bolt missing his chest by centimeters, and his counterattack shattered the machine's entire chassis with a single palm strike that carried 4 times his normal mass behind it. The floor cracked, not metaphorically, not slightly. The reinforced durasteel plating, rated to withstand the landing impacts of heavy atmosphere dropships, actually fractured under the raw force of Owen's strike. Deep, jagged spiderweb fractures spread outward from the point of impact, the metal groaning in structural protest. Alert. Structural integrity compromised. Chamber surface durability at 87%. Vexalvor barely even heard the computer. He was too busy watching the impossible occur right before his eyes. Owen launched his body at a cluster of 3 tactical drones. When his boots landed among them, the floor cracked a second time, deeper this time. His fists had become solid hammers, each strike driven by gravity-multiplied mass and total, unyielding physiological commitment. Machines exploded into fragments under his advance. He wasn't fighting them. He was systematically annihilating them. A massive, holographic concrete wall began to collapse directly over his position. Instead of dodging, Owen caught it. He actually caught a multi-ton section of concrete that the simulation's haptic field rendered solid against his skin. His legs buckled only slightly before his frame stabilized. With a roar of raw, primeval effort that echoed off the shriek of the field generators, he hurled the multi-ton slab sideways. The massive projectile took out 6 combat drones in a single, cascading explosion of fire and shrapnel. The floor cracked deeper, chunks of durasteel tearing free. Warning, chamber integrity at 58% and falling. Emergency shutdown imminent. Vexalvor tried to drag his heavy limbs toward the main console to shut the simulation down, but his body simply refused to cooperate. The 4.2 gravity field had him pinned to the spot, his muscles screaming in agony, his lungs gasping for oxygen. He could only watch as the human destroyed the remaining units, the training facility dying under his feet. Owen eliminated the final tactical drone with a strike that buried his fist wrist deep into its armored chassis. The machine detonated. The floor cracked one final time with a sound like thunder, and then the entire gravitational field collapsed into zero. Emergency shutdown initiated. Catastrophic structural failure detected. Evacuating chamber. Medical teams en route. The crushing weight vanished instantly. Vexalvor collapsed to his hands and knees on the ruined floor, gasping for air, his vision swimming in circles. Every single muscle in his body felt like it had been beaten with industrial hammers. His pride, that magnificent, ancient pride that had sustained his career, lay in tatters around him like the shattered durasteel plating. Across the chamber, Owen Bridger stood dead in the center of a crater of his own making. He was bleeding heavily from his nose, his body swaying slightly from sheer exhaustion, but he was standing, still standing. "Just a Tuesday," Owen repeated quietly, his voice barely audible over the blaring emergency sirens. Then his eyes rolled back and his body finally admitted what his will had refused to accept. He collapsed into the wreckage. The medical bay of the Calreth Academy had seen its fair share of training accidents, but the scene that greeted Commander Kellis when she entered was entirely unprecedented. Owen Bridger lay on a central medical platform, surrounded by diagnostic arrays that kept chirping in absolute confusion as they tried to make sense of human telemetry. The readings were bizarre. Elevated adrenaline levels, massive stress hormone counts, and thousands of microscopic muscle tears. But nothing permanent. Nothing that suggested he had just survived a lethal gravity threshold and dismantled a reinforced military bay. On the adjacent platform lay Vexalvor, looking like a fallen monument. His massive frame was hooked up to twice as many monitors as the human, his scales completely drained of their usual vibrant luster. Kellis stood between them, her forearms crossed tightly in an expression of profound, terrifying displeasure. "So," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "would either of you care to explain why I just had to authorize 40,000 credits worth of emergency repairs to Training Base 7? Repairs that will require us to shut down advanced combat training for the next 3 weeks." Vexalvor said absolutely nothing, staring blankly at the sterile ceiling. Owen, who had regained consciousness a few minutes prior, cleared his throat carefully. "That would be primarily my fault, Commander. I may have been excessively enthusiastic in my performance." "Excessively enthusiastic?" Kellis repeated, her voice rising. "You cracked a durasteel floor rated for starship impacts, Trainee Bridger. The field generators are completely fused. We found drone debris embedded in walls that are supposed to be indestructible." She turned her sharp gaze directly onto Vexalvor. "And you overrode 6 distinct safety protocols, pushed gravity to levels that nearly killed an intake recruit, and authorized lethal force simulations. I have half a mind to strip you of your instructor rank and send you for an immediate psychological evaluation. Did you even read this human's full evolutionary file before you decided to crush him?" Vexalvor's total silence was answer enough. Kellis pulled up a massive holographic display, with one of her upper hands scrolling through the data tracks. Earth, a 93% survival rate from childhood diseases before they even developed modern genetic medicine. Predator species that actively hunted them for millions of years. Extreme climate variations of 70 degrees Celsius between seasonal cycles. Atmospheric oxygen variations that would be toxic to half the species in this academy. Natural disasters that regularly level their settlements. And they thrived. They didn't just survive, Instructor. They conquered their entire world and then looked to the stars for harder challenges. She gestured sharply at Owen's platform. Humans are persistence hunters. Their ancestors would chase prey across open plains for days, until the target's heart literally exploded from pure exhaustion. They possess more endurance muscle fiber than any species we have ever encountered. Their adrenaline response can temporarily grant them strength increases of over 40% under lethal threat. You made the classic galactic mistake, Vexalvor. You saw 1.0 standard gravity, and you assumed weakness. You confused comfort with fragility. Owen shifted slightly against his medical supports. If I may, Commander, Earth does have low gravity. Instructor Vexalvor isn't entirely wrong to think that can affect us. Put me on Drower Prime permanently. And yes, my body would eventually wear down under the constant pressure. But that is the thing about humans. We aren't specialists. We are generalists. We don't specialize in one perfect environment. Our planet made us capable of surviving any environment you throw us into. Vexalvor finally turned his head to look at the human, his voice hoarse. You knew. You knew exactly what I was trying to do to you in there. Yes, Instructor, Owen said. And you let me? You could have reported the protocol override. You could have refused the field increase? Yes, Instructor. Why? Owen looked him dead in the eyes, his expression calm and steady. Because you needed to learn the lesson more than I did, sir.
The universe will always try to calculate victory by standard matrices, by gravity, baselines, armor, thickness, and muscle density. They look at humanity's open hand and mistake our comfort for fragility. What they fail to realize is that one true armor isn't worn on our chest. It is forged in our psychology, where we are the persistence hunters of the cosmos. Thanks for turning into human ascendancy. If Owen Bridger's victory under 4.2 gram proved to you that humans are built differently, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below with your theories on next week's combat course. Keep your posture straight, respect the gravity, and we will see you in the next transmission.